It's my feel-good breakfast show.
Show them how much you love them with Bob Martin.
We now turn our attention to the holistic health of our pets, our four-legged friends. Now, this is quite a shocking result. A survey recently showed that 53% of adult dogs and 55% of adult cats are recognized as being obese. The biggest problem, obviously not your pets, but your eating habits, your ability to identify if your pet is indeed overweight and what to do about that. We have holistic vet Megan Kelly joining us this morning, who is... I'm always amazed at how the dogs flock to you as soon as you arrive in studio. They look very pleased with themselves, especially Bob. To just hit the idea home, what happens to that pet? What are some of the health implications to an overweight pet?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big problem. Obesity can predispose dogs to some hormonal conditions, such as diabetes. It can also be a sign that a dog has other hormonal conditions like an underactive thyroid or a disease called Cushing's disease. But the main thing is that extra weight can put pressure on the heart, can cause problems like exacerbating orthopedic conditions, so exacerbating arthritis. And also, it's what we call pro-inflammatory, so fat actually makes inflammatory conditions worse. So any problems like skin, where there's inflammation, that'll be a lot worse in an obese dog than it would be in a thin dog. So there are a lot of problems that can happen health-wise.
Just like with humans.
Yeah.
Are certain breeds more prone to it than others?
There are certain breeds. They've done some studies. Large breed dogs like Labradors, Golden Retrievers,
obsessed
Rotties,
with food, yeah.
And this smaller breeds like Yorkshire Terriers, Maltese Poodles. And it's more prevalent in female dogs than it is in males.
Ella, block your ears. She was just pretending not to hear you right there. So Megan, what do we do then? What is the first step once we've now identified that our pet is obese?
The first thing you need to do is to go to the vet for a checkup. So what they'll do is they'll weigh your pet. They'll do what we call a body condition score. And what we do is we have a look to see where the fat is accumulated. And we'll have a feel over the ribs to feel if we can palpate ribs. What we want to do is when we feel, to actually feel like a xylophone. So you're going to feel bump, 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 bump over the ribs.
I think that's often, as soon as you feel your pet's ribs, your dog's ribs, you're like, oh, it's too thin, it's too thin.
No, you should be able to actually palpate them. If they're sticking out and you can actually see them, then they're too thin. But if you can just palpate them, that's great. And then we'll also look at the waist, just to see whether, if you look from the top, to see whether there's actually a waist or they're just straight, or if they've got a lot of fat accumulated there, and then a pendulous abdomen. But there's actually a thing called a body condition score where we actually score them out of 5. So like average will be 2.5, 3 out of 5. Once they score them and they've got the weight, then they will look at the type of food that you're feeding and make sure that you're feeding the right amount. So that's always a big problem. So you'll look on the package and it says you must feed them this amount per day, but then you give them that amount, and then you give them some chicken, and then you give them some treats, and then the amount actually adds up. So they're actually being fed too much. So it's important to make sure that you're feeding the right amount. Yeah.
Bob's loving that. I think you need to check his ribs again. He absolutely loves it. And I suppose a lot of it boils down to lifestyle as well. What tips do you recommend in terms of adapting your dog's or your cat's lifestyle so that they are living healthier, that they're not that prone to becoming obese?
Yeah, I mean, exercise is really important, and daily exercise, little and often is better. What people tend to do, mainly because of work, is they tend to exercise them over the weekend and not on the weekend. It's the same like us. If you have regular exercise, your metabolism is increased. And then you just got to check out for treats and things like that that you're feeding them. So we tend to give treats as rewards, and maybe for us, maybe we feel guilty that we haven't spent time with them, and you tend to reward them.
It's more to placate ourselves than to actually treat the dog.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, things like, for example, if you feed them like a biscuit, that's like a hamburger for us. And a small little piece of cheese is like a whole slab of chocolate for us, calorie-wise. So you have to be careful what you're feeding, and you want to feed things that are low in calories. And then the other thing is you can also use their regular pellets as treats. Sometimes they're not as palatable as all the nice tasty things.
Or you could just resort to a little bit of love. Megan, thank you so much. That really has been enlightening. And I think it hits home that common sense is our first step, but just learn to know your dog's condition, what their optimal condition is, and make those adjustments. You are the one ultimately with the responsibility on your shoulders. With resources like Bob Martin out there, there is no reason why we can't have a holistically healthy pet.
Show them how much you love them with Bob Martin.